Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nicole Walker, and I'm the Senior Manager Alumni Engagement here at Griffith University. And today we're going to be talking about career paths, progress, pivot, or portfolio. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are meeting and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Today's session is being recorded and a stenographer is providing live captions. So to access these, you can click on a link that we'll share in the chat. Just before we went live, the chat was glitching slightly. So if that's happening for you, just hit refresh and it seems to come back on after a minute or so. It's been fine for the last 5 minutes, but just to let you know, if you're trying to ask a question later on, please keep persevering. It does seem to kick back in, and hopefully it's back in permanently now. So today we're going to be exploring how to build a career that grows with you, whether that means progressing in your current role, making a bold pivot, or building a portfolio of roles across different sectors or specializations. And we're joined by two exceptional speakers today who bring a wealth of experience and perspective to this topic. So very pleased to introduce you shortly to Professor Caroline Ruckert, who is the Dean of Student Experience and Employability at Griffith University. Caroline has held senior leadership roles in higher education in both Australia and Canada, and has deep expertise in employability, student success, internationalisation, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. She's passionate about helping people unlock their potential and navigate purposeful, future-focused careers. We also have joining us today Leona Murphy, who's a Griffith graduate and one of our outstanding alumni award winners. And Leona has built a distinguished career as a company chair and non-executive director, with more than 30 years experience across the financial services sector and ASX top 20 companies. Leona currently serves as the chair of RACQ Limited, RACQ Bank and Helia, and also as a director with Liberty Financial Group. Leona also contributes her expertise as an independent member of Griffith University's Audit and Risk Committee. She's been named one of Australia's 100 Women of Influence in 2015 and played a leading role in global initiatives, including the United Nations Environment Programme. We're so fortunate to have both Caroline and Leona here joining us today. I'm going to bring them on screen. Hello to you both, and thank you for being here with us today. We've got lots of ground to cover, and I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions coming through. So we're going to jump straight into some questions today. So Caroline, I'm going to start with you. We're going to look at initially some general career strategy and transition. So for professionals who face uncertainty when considering a career pivot, what is some advice you have for those who are unsure about their next career move?
Thanks, Nicole, and it's lovely to have everybody here today. So thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this conversation. I think actually that's a great question, and I think it's honestly one that so many of us can relate to. In a world where industries are rapidly shifting, where new roles seem to be appearing every day, I think it's really important to acknowledge that that feeling of uncertainty about your next move is completely normal, and it's actually not a sign that something's wrong, but it's actually, I think, has become part of navigating a modern career. And given my role, I find Mark Zavica's career construction theory a really useful way to think about this. Mark invites us to see our careers not through the metaphor of a ladder that we need to climb, but he invites us to think about our careers more through the lens of the stories we create and recreate over time. And like any good story, a good story has chapters that build on each other, and that our stories should reflect our values, our interests, and ultimately the themes that emerge that are most meaningful for us. And the reason I wanted to start there is because I think the frame that we use is really significant. So Mark would say that instead of asking the question when you're in that moment of what should my next job be, he invites us to ask a different question, which is, what story do I want to tell? Do I want this next chapter of my life to tell? And I think by pivoting from that concept of a ladder where there's a really linear process to more that concept of a story, what he does is he opens up space for us to bring things into the conversation that I think are really matter, our purpose, our values, and also invites us to reflect. The other thing that CRICOS, I think, emphasizes in his work is that our careers today are incredibly fluid. And so people move across roles, they move across industries, they move across even countries. But importantly, that our careers aren't things that just happen to us. Again, that we are the storytellers and that we can shape and reshape our careers. I also really like John Combolt's happenstance theory. And what I like about that, and when I bring it together with the story piece, is he talks about that and it gently reminds us that you can't plan for everything, and that sometimes the most powerful moments in our career are those moments that occur through happenstance. So I know I started with a few theories, but what does that mean then in practice? So the 3 bits of advice I'd probably have if you're facing a pivot. The first one is actually to pause and to reflect on your story. And before you jump to the next thing, take the time to think about what's meaningful for you, what's energizing you, because understanding your current stories can often unlock the most powerful clues that can shape then the choices that you make. I think the second thing I would probably advise I'd give is actually about how you view that uncertainty and about being really intentional about how you frame your mindset in relation to that uncertainty. And I'd invite you to think about moments of uncertainty, not as that you're starting from scratch again, but that you're building forward, and that every time you're pivoting, you're bringing with you all of the skills and experiences that have brought you to that point. But importantly, also within all of that, I think one of the most powerful things is to make sure that your values continue to be your compass, regardless of what job you do. And then the third bit of advice that I'd probably have, and this links to the happenstance, is stay curious. Have the courage to experiment, to reach out, to try new things, because what I found is that there's rarely a perfect next move. And often the way that we find clarity is through action rather than expecting that clarity beforehand. So those would be my three bits of advice.
Thank you. Great opening, and already I can just sense people taking notes and making sure we've got those locked down. Talking through that fluidity that you spoke about, and that we are the storytellers and we are more in control perhaps than we have been before of our careers. I'd like to bring Leona in to have a little talk around portfolio careers and how they are becoming more popular. Traditionally, you had one job and you did that one job and you went home, and that is just fast becoming not the norm and not the aspiration of what we are seeing in the workforce today. So Leona, you have a lot of titles yourself, so I'd love to hear your perspective around portfolio careers, what you see as the benefits, challenges of managing those multiple roles or career streams, and how can you take some deliberate steps to put yourself in a place where you can take on some of those extra opportunities. Oh, sorry. Are you able to just unmute yourself, Leona, or I can try to do it from here?
I can. Someone had to do it, so may as well be me. Thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Caroline. A lot of what you said actually really resonates with me, and I've got a feeling we're going to be covering some common ground, which is interesting, because as you said, Nicole, it wasn't actually that long ago that portfolio careers, particularly in the corporate arena, were necessarily not well known of. It was in the main for people who were non-executives or people who had their own consulting business. But we've seen a lot of change over the last decade, where people go from actually being an executive to being a non-executive in multiple organisations, or being freelancers, I'll use that term, in multiple organisations. And those careers have shifted remarkably. So we are managing things and a little bit more complexity as a result of that, a little differently. And so no longer is it one job for a career. It's actually can be for individuals multiple jobs at multiple times. Now, the benefits of that are compelling. Firstly, it enables a little bit of financial resilience through diversification of income. So having different organisations that you're working with can actually smooth your earning capacity and your earning potential. I certainly find it provides intellectual stimulation across multiple contexts. Now, the ability to see similar problems solved in different ways has been particularly interesting and enlightening for me, and something that I really quite value, because as we all know, there's more than one way to solve a problem, and you get to see it live, actually, which is quite interesting. I think as having a portfolio career also means you can have genuine autonomy. And what I mean by that is you're not necessarily connected or attached to an organisation. Actually, it enables you to bring independent thinking because you are involved in lots of other organisations and you don't feel that sense of attachment, or shall we say, had recently been drinking the Kool-Aid. So it does give you the ability to for independent thinking. The other thing that I think is really interesting and compelling for people who are considering portfolio careers is demand is definitely increasing. The Australian corporate sector, 55% of freelancers report to earning more in their portfolio role than they did in their full-time employment. And globally, 40% of executives are now expecting freelancers to be part of their workforce. So that's a big shift. Now, companies are deliberately building what I would call hybrid talent models. So looking for what talent can we buy in independently to roles. So portfolio work isn't just viable. Actually, it's increasingly being preferred by organisations. So it's a bit of a win-win for individuals as well as for organisations. But with those benefits, I think the challenges are very real. So I think it will depend on the individual. But time management is really critical. When you're running multiple organisations simultaneously, you really need to make sure you manage your time well. My diary is full for the next year and a half, so I know exactly what I'm doing this time next year. But that's because board meetings are scheduled that far in advance. For me, I really like that because that gives me flexibility to think about what else can I do now that I know that I'm doing that. So income variability, as I said, brings its benefits, but you also have to be pretty attuned to financial cash flow and what that will mean for you as an individual. There's what I call opportunity overload, and the ability and difficulty of saying no. I personally can get excited in many things, so that makes it difficult when opportunities come past my desk that actually I probably shouldn't really take. So Caroline mentioned earlier the importance of purpose and values in making those decisions, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but looking through that lens is absolutely critical when you're running a portfolio. I think the other thing that's interesting and can sometimes be a challenge is isolation and lack of infrastructure. So you can't just walk down the corridor and speak to your colleague, and you can't just call HR or IT when something goes wrong. Actually, you're a bit isolated. So that has to be something that you enjoy and or can work around. Now, Nicole, you asked for success strategies. Do you want me to build in on those now?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
So I guess firstly, I would think strategic synergy. So think about your portfolio as not just the sum of its parts, but what that means for it as a whole, and make sure that your roles reinforce each other rather than compete or distinctly are separate. And as I said, being disciplined around opportunity selection is pretty important, and do that through how might this opportunity align to my purpose and my values, and or how is this going to help me build my capabilities for that future story that Caroline spoke about. The second piece is having the right mindset. And I think that is so important because professionals who thrive in portfolio careers, in board portfolios or general portfolios, I think share certain traits. Firstly, they're self-directed and actually can self-motivate. They're comfortable with ambiguity and don't try and solve ambiguity. And they are also energised by variety. Now, they're not only disciplined in what they do and what they get involved in, but also they're disciplined with their time. Procrastination can be the killer of a successful portfolio career. And the next one for me is the networking effect. And in executive life, it's interesting. It's normally how you succeed is about what you know, or actually sometimes it might be who you know. But in a portfolio career, it becomes all about who knows you. And networking is critical for that. So I'll talk about networking a little bit later, I think. But above all else, understand what hardwires you and where you need to grow. Your values, your purpose, and what's important to you are really important. And think about, Carolyn calls it your chapter. I'll call it, think about, yourself in 10 to 15 years time, and what are the skills and experiences and capabilities that you're going to need to get there. Now, for some, it'll be they're wanting a portfolio of boards. For some, it'll be boards and some consulting roles. And others, it might be a mix of all of the above. But the pathway will be different. There's no set pathway for this, but you are going to need specific skills, experiences, and infrastructure. So I encourage you to start your build. I personally was very deliberate in my transition from executive to portfolio, and I think that helped me enormously.
Awesome. Thank you. So many pearls of wisdom from you both already. But yeah, it's really like you're describing you almost running your own one-woman company, and what the products are, your roles, and what works together well, and how do you build your reputation, and how do you ensure income and everything for the future. So really interesting. And then some of those skills you talked around, resilience, time management, being disciplined, are things that I think employers are still looking for in employees as well as in those more executive roles. So, Carolyn, taking it back to around, I'm guessing most people joining us today are in a more not a sole career, but have a primary source of income and may have some interest in changing around. But across each of these different types of roles, no doubt there's some consistent skills or things that we're looking for in the future that will help us set us up for success. So would love to hear from you around continuous learning for career growth, and what sort of skills or areas you encourage people to explore.
Yeah, the question of skills, it's the question I often get asked, which is, what are the skills that matter most? And quite frankly, the answer will change depending on who you ask, and there's lots of debate and lots of versions of lists. But I do think, even though there are a lot of different lists, there are also, I think, some really consistent themes that have stood the test of time and have been quite steady. I also think right now, when I answer that question, I think the pace of change, we often have talked about that for a long time, but I do think the pace of change right now is extraordinary. We've got everything from the AI and the automation. We've got transformation of different sectors around clean energy. We've got significant demographic changes. Like I think places of work are now multi-generational in a way they never were before. And I also think that the ways that work is happening in a much more connected, flexible, but also in a much more autonomous way. And all of those factors are really significant. So we might not all agree on the skills, but I do think that the one thing that we would all probably agree on right now is that continuous learning has moved from being something that was a nice to have and optional to being really a foundational piece that you need in order to be employable and ultimately adaptable. So when I look at skills, I tend to look at the World Economic Forum lists, and I also really like KPMG's Future of Work lists. And when I look at that, there are really 5 skills, because I was reflecting on that, because there's a lot of skills. But the 5 that I would probably flag are pretty key for at least the next 5 to 10 years. One would be digital fluency and AI literacy. But I think with that, it's not just knowing what the tools are, but I think really importantly, it's knowing how to use them to have impact, but also understanding the limits of those tools and how to use them in meaningful ways. And understanding the context within which we're using them. At Griffith, we talk about, we don't just want graduates who make it, who have skills, but we also want them to be able to make it matter. So wanting a graduate who knows how to use AI literacy, for example, to support diabetes health education in a regional rural community, they're going to need to know the digital skills plus a whole range of other skills for that digital capability to be impactful. The second skill that, again, I think is not new is, I think, complex problem solving and systems thinking. And I think those two things need to go hand in hand, which is the ability to connect ideas across disciplines. A lot of it can be very tempting, I think, for students to hone in on just focus on one path, but to focus on being able to work across disciplines, the ability to see patterns, and to make sense of those challenges. And that's often, for example, when we think about equity and diversity, some of our greatest pattern thinkers are actually our neurodivergent staff. So again, thinking about strengths also in a much more flexible way. I think the third skill, again, which is not new, is the skill around adaptability and learning agility. Because of that rapid change, I think the workers that have that ability to learn and unlearn and relearn really quickly, and who will lean into that with a place of openness, I think they will have a real edge, and I think that's a key skill. Creativity and critical thinking, again, these are deep human capabilities that will continue, I think, to be important. Our ability to imagine new possibilities, again. And, even when we think about university, it's not just about the degree that you get, but it's also about how the learning actually teaches you to think in different ways. So, for example, I have an English degree, and people often say, well, why did you do that? It was the most powerful tool to teach me the discipline of thinking across different lenses, and I use it every day in my job. And then finally, I think for me, the other skill that will continue to resonate is the ability to work with people, the ability to think with people. And so that's not just about, for me, empathy, but it's about creating the conditions for people to be truly present in the workplace, so that you can actually access the full strength of capability that you have. Because there's nothing worse than you've got highly capable people who don't get along, who don't know how to work together. So I'm finding that the leaders who increasingly know how to do that relational piece, which is often tricky because organizations aren't always very good at valuing that, or even understanding what that looks like. I think that's a key strength. But what I would say is, you can have all of those skills, but I actually think that the skill for me that ties it all together in the end is actually a really simple one, which is curiosity. That ability to stay open, that ability to have a continuous mindset of and being a learner. Because I think when we're curious, that's often one of the key skills that helps us be resilient. It helps us also understand how to be relevant. And it's also, I think, the skill that best prepares us for whatever challenge or whatever comes next. So that would be some good old skills that you've probably heard before. But I actually think it's the combination of all of those and how to deploy them in the right moment, in the right context, and building that relational ecosystem. Those are the things that are key.
Thanks, Caroline. I think that builds on what Leona was saying, and really talks to that, being responsible for yourself and your self management, and that you're in control, and you can keep learning for as long as possible. And so I guess that also, in terms of traditional roles where you would work through till 65 or 60, the age change bounces around. That's something that we're not seeing as much anymore, where people are dipping in and out of the workforce and staying in longer in this new sort of flexible space that people can strive towards.
Nicole, the one thing I'd add to that is the ability to be also tolerate discomfort, and to not have all the answers, to be able to go into a room and actually say, I don't have to always be the expert, but to trust processes, to trust the people who are with you, and that ability to tolerate ambiguity or uncertainty. Again, that's a really key skill. Sorry, I just needed to add that because that's
thank you. That is that is very important, and I'm sure even if you try, it's out of your control these days. And the amount of new systems we've probably each learned, or new technology we've not, even if you're not being curious, that they're forced upon you these days, that you have to get in amongst it. Looking longer term, Leona, we'll just take a quick look now at retirement, which for some of our alumni might be imminent, and for others it might be a really distant concept that they haven't really considered it at all. But in terms of long-term career planning and building those portfolio careers, I'd love to hear your thoughts around advice on how to approach that, how to remain engaged and fulfilled in those later stages of the career, and to keep chasing new opportunities, I think, instead of just sitting stagnant. That doesn't seem to be the you don't have to do that anymore by the sounds of what you're saying. You can keep striving and achieving new things throughout your career.
Absolutely. And, I work with a lot of people who are, some in their 70s, some in their 80s, and still really contributing significantly to the work that they're involved in. And I really like this question because it really forces us to think differently about retirement, and the idea of working full time, as you said, until you're 60 or 65 and then stopping completely is not only outdated, it's undesirable for many people and financially unrealistic for others. So we needed a new model, I think. And, today's professionals, could be still, healthfully alive for another 30 years post-retirement. Now, that's too long to simply stop and go on cruises. I don't know about you, but I like to be a little bit more actively engaged than that. And there's nothing wrong with going on cruises, I will say, for those who are cruisers. What I'm seeing is portfolio retirement, though, which is a portfolio of life stuff. So serving on boards, consulting consecutively, mentoring, essentially working 20 hours a week while you're still utilising the skills and experiences, capabilities that you have acquired over decades of work, and once actually leaves. And I think most value that is being derived from this portfolio retirement piece is not necessarily the technical discipline that people have worked in, but actually the fact that people have lived through many, many cycles of business, whatever business that they might be in, and also seen multiple leadership styles and cultures and different things happening in different organisations, and have a few scars for things that have happened along the way. And you can't learn that stuff. You can mentor through that stuff, but I think it's really important that we keep those skills and capabilities and experiences within our working environment. Now, and it doesn't matter what age you are, by the way, you thinking through, actually, what do I want to do with my life is really important. Now, work is only one part of your life. So I encourage people, when we're talking about planning for retirement, to think about, well, what do they want to do in 10 to 15 years' time? Where do they see their life going? Or what, to use Caroline's terminology, what story is going to be playing out for them in 10 to 15 years' time? And what do you need to get there? So what skills, experiences and capabilities, as well as finances, actually are going to enable you to live that story? And that's all aspects of your life, not just work. What are you wanting to be doing with relationships and travel and family and community and charity? And what is it that you're wanting to contribute to more broadly than just work? Because work is an important part of our life, but it is only one part of our life. Second thing I encourage people to do, unsurprisingly, is cultivate their network and actually think about their personal brand, because you need to be more than just your business card or more than just your role. Actually, what is it that you stand for above all else? I think that we spoke a little bit before about financial optionality, which I think is it's not about financial independence. It's about giving yourself the option to choose how you work, not just whether you work. And that opens up the discussion about portfolio career, as I said before. And give it a go. I said, try and experience before you transition. Think about, what roles you might be doing and what you might want to experiment. Now, and it's not about waiting until you retire, Nicole. People should start thinking about what's my life look like now? Gosh, if I was in my 20s and 30s and could think differently in the context of where might I want my life to go, that's a different framing than I certainly went through when I was in my 20s and 30s. But that's retirement.
Thank you. It sounds much more exciting, and something very different to what we were looking at. I guess when many of us first started our career, in terms of how things have changed. Our next question we've got here talks around fulfillment, which I think we've been has come up nearly in every conversation so far that we've had about the necessary need to have that and how it contributes positively to your career. So I just want to explore that just, I guess, one more time. And Caroline, particularly looking at a young graduate lens where maybe you don't have as much choice, where you're taking your first role that's been offered to you. And how does that work? So what role does purpose play in career satisfaction, and how can people do that, align their work with their values and long-term aspirations, particularly when they're new to the workforce and, might be that, or to even taking the next step up, because sometimes that step change from, being a worker to then managing staff it introduces a whole nother level of complex discussions or, integrity, different things you're accessing now within an organization that you have to work through. To look at that. So we'd love to look at that. And then Leona, I guess from you looking from that organizational perspective, trying to attract talent, how are they starting to now pitch themselves to show their purpose and values, and how important that is now in recruiting talent. But Caroline, first to you, just looking at how people, sorry, I think I've asked about 6 questions into one there, but
I actually think that question is the question of the time, because I think, and I think it's important on a whole range of different levels. It's really important because I think that question really reflects the mindset of the current generation of graduates, where, if you were to go back 10, 15 years, I remember when I was graduating, purpose was seen as a nice to have. I don't think it's a nice to have anymore. I think it's become an anchor point for young professionals. And it used to be, what am I going to do? What do I do? Now I think there's a real push to say, well, why does what I do matter? And how does what I do create impact? And again, one of the people that has done some really lovely thinking on this is Donald Supper, and he has this concept of lifespan, life space. He has a lifespan, life space theory, and he reminds us that sort of in our digital life, we're going to have multiple roles. We're going to be at work. We're going to be citizens. We're going to be members of families. We're going to be learners. And his insight is that the real satisfaction comes, and this links to something that Leona was saying before about portfolio careers. It comes when we have the ability to integrate all of these different roles into a coherent or value-aligned whole. And purpose then becomes the thread that actually ties all of these roles together and helps us ultimately not just to make meaning in in an individual experience, but to make meaning over time. But I also think it's also one of the biggest challenges for young people, where, well, how do I practice my purpose? What does that actually mean? And purpose, it's often talked about very abstractly. It's often rhetoric. It's often not talked about in relation to things like power and privilege and capital that we have. So how do you put purpose into practice? A couple of thoughts. One, and this is, I'm sorry to say this is so basic, but I think it's really important to clarify what are your values and your non-negotiables. So when I was moving jobs recently, I actually made a list and I said, okay, my non-negotiables is I need value alignment. My non-negotiables is I need a scope of autonomy. I need to be able to have impact and influence, and I need to do things that matter and are meaningful. So I was really, really clear on my values, and it really helped me cut through all of the options to really hone in on what mattered to me. So that's the first bit of advice, is know your values and do the work to think about that in a really intentional way so that you can filter your career decisions through that values lens. And that doesn't happen by accident. It has to happen through intention. The second piece of advice I would have around aligning values around your career would be realistic. That there's a difference between seeking a job that will perfectly align versus seeking a job that will align in some way to your purpose. So not every job that we have will align to our purpose, and that's okay. But when I'm in context of work, I'm always looking for projects and teams. Like when I'm spinning up a new initiative, I'm looking for not just skills fit, but I'm also looking for values and purpose fit. Because when you have that, it creates, I call it the magic fairy dust. It creates a mixture where those skills then again start to be utilized in a much more impactful way. The third piece of advice I would have, and again, it's picking up on something that Leona was saying, is to invite you to think about purpose, not just related to a single job, but thinking about a purpose portfolio. So thinking about how are you creating purpose in other parts of your life through, side hustles or through mentoring experiences, through volunteering, so that not putting your purpose into a single bucket and making work be the only space, because sometimes we have to make choices around work where we don't have all of our needs met, but we can still live a purposeful and meaningful life. The other bit would be that just as we are always learning and unlearning and relearning, to really see that conversation of purpose as something that needs to live and breathe and evolve. And so, what your purpose might be at 25 might be quite fundamentally different than, you're 35, you've got kids that are about to start high school, you're thinking about, a whole range of different things. So I would also advise, every year check in, where I'm at with my purpose, how have they shifted, what have I solidified and have just is my constants, and then what are the things that are changing and evolving. And then the final bit, and this is I think a really key bit, is learning the skill of communicating your purpose and being able to go into places of work and not just speak about, I have the skills to build a great bridge and I've had lots of experience. So a lot of young graduates will go into job interviews and they will focus on their skills and they will focus on their experiences. And don't get me wrong, those two things are really, really important. But the graduate who goes into a job interview and says, I have the skills and experience to build you a great bridge, but I also know why bridges matter because they connect communities. I understand what it means to build a bridge, for example, on unceded Indigenous lands, and how that is a very different value proposition than somebody who simply talks through the language of skills. So that ability to communicate purpose, when I'm in interviews, I remember the candidates who bring their purpose into the room and have very intentionally aligned their skills, their experiences to that purpose. And I find that when candidates do that, they naturally attract roles and organizations that align with them. And that is the final bit that I'll say is purpose wasn't always at the center. The reason I think it's become the question of our time is because we know from the research that when people are able to align their work to purpose, they lead better lives, they're more resilient, they're more curious, they're more creative, they're more strategic. And purpose becomes almost an activator of so much of other things that really deeply matter. One of the things I love about Griffith, when we think about success, we don't actually just think how many of our students got a full-time job. We want every student at Griffith to graduate with not just that I have a business degree, but I know how to use my business degree to build a better world. So our graduates know how to make it matter. And again, that's a really powerful edge. But my final takeaway on that would be it doesn't happen by accident. It is something that you have to build in intentionally into your journey, and it's something that you have to value. And employers will pick up really quickly on whether it's authentic. They will feel it, and something that you've come to through with an intentional set of choices versus something that you're trying to do to position yourself. So a huge fan of purpose, and really excited that that's now part of the conversation.
Thank you, Leona. Sorry, my battery laptop was just flashing, but it's going to be fine. Leona, often, so looking through what Caroline has said, and now that research that has coming through, I guess, is proving that purpose is important. A few decades ago, it was all around profit and choosing an organization that was making money was seen as safe. But I guess we're sort of hearing that maybe that's not the only factor or something. So from the organizations you work with, how are you seeing them adjust, their discussions in the board meetings, but also how they're presenting themselves out to the public in terms of attracting talent, and that profit and purpose don't always align neatly. So how are you seeing that play out in the boardroom?
I would say that profit and purpose actually do align. And I would say that profit comes as a result of purpose. I was very fortunate, both over the course of, the last 20 years, to do a couple of global study tours looking at purpose-led organisations and getting a real deep understanding of what they do and why they do it and what's the so what in it all. Because the business case actually has been proven. Now, the organisations with authentic purpose-led strategies outperform competitors financially, full stop. Now, Jim Collins proved that back in the, I think it was the mid-90s, and Raj Sisodia demonstrated that in his work on conscious capitalism. So this is something that I have studied a lot about and very much embody in the portfolio that I have, actually. So at an organisational level, it's really not about creating a glossy mission statement or a purpose statement so that we go, here we go, look at that, it's on the wall, and oh, we might pop our values next to that while we're at it. That sounds good. People see right through this if it's not authentic. Authentic purpose must be embedded in strategy, must be embedded in decisions, it must be embedded in resource allocation and who gets promoted. Now, it's organisations that use purpose as their North Star, the prism through which all the decisions that they've made, all of the actions that they take, and all of the customer experiences that they create that will win. And I strongly believe that. So conversations in boardrooms that I'm in now is, how does this align to purpose? And is this aligned to our values? And those efforts that don't get done. Like there was one in a board room that I was in recently, which was a really interesting initiative for the organisation to pursue, and probably could have made a bit of money and made sense from a brand alignment perspective. But when we were trying to trade off between that and something else, actually it wasn't as aligned to purpose as the something else. So we chose the something else. And I have to be careful about, I've got to talk in code because I can't say the wrong. But I think, if you then parlay that to what does it mean from talent, then purpose-driven employees are proven to be more engaged, more innovative, and more resilient. So professionals who work in alignment with their values, as Caroline said, are going to be more satisfied and more sustainable. There's empirical evidence on multiple studies that actually demonstrate that. Now, it's a win-win when you've got a purpose-led organisation with values-based and purpose-led people all driving in the same direction. It's a tight labour market. Talent has leverage. We know that. So organisations that embrace purpose authentically, I think, will win the talent war. Those that fake it will lose ground. So it is purpose leads to profit. I can 100% guarantee it.
Awesome. Thank you. That is so exciting to hear. I think that is how it is. And I think if you've been in situations where your purpose isn't aligned, or you've been in an organisation and then been in one where it does, I think that the difference is so contrasting it can become really clear to you. I'm just conscious of time, and we've got a lot of questions coming through to the chat, so I might just go to you both now just for any other thoughts you wanted to share with us, and then I'll just start moving into the Q&A. So Caroline, was there anything else that you, just to sort of wrap up, I guess, this segment, that you would also like to reiterate or to let the audience know?
I think I've been listening for themes that have come through, and I guess I'm aware that we've probably got some young graduates in the room that are about to start their journey. I think that one of the biggest challenges when we think about employability is graduates feel this tremendous pressure that they need to get it right immediately. And what I would probably say is I would invite every new graduate who's in the room today to reframe that success in a first-time job is not an outcome in itself, but to really focus your mindset on the learning ground that you want to chart. because if you can prioritize your learning and really focus on, rather than on what the destination is, but focusing on how you want to build capability and capital, how you want to align your purpose, how do you want to stay curious, and also importantly, how you want to wrap around you humans and mentors that are going to help you on your journey. Those are, for me, key things. And sometimes the most powerful tools that you have are things like the ability to reflect, the ability to have the courage to learn and unlearn, the ability to actually say my well-being really matters and I need to take care of myself in order to make those courageous choices. So those are, for me, some of the threads of today. And then I'll leave it with curiosity, most powerful tool ever, I think. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And Leona, how about yourself?
I think the two for me, I mean, I agree with everything that Caroline said. Ambiguity is an interesting one because sometimes we can think that we're embracing ambiguity by trying to create clarity. And actually, ambiguity is something that you really can't get an answer on and or get clarity for. Actually, you can't get certainty in ambiguity. So really focus on those things, break it down into those things that you can have control over and those things that you can have influence over, and then think through, what might I need to do about this? Don't try and solve the big situation, actually break it down into solvable chunks and be adaptable. And I think the remain curious is critical, but I would say put curiosity into action. And I mean, I'm encouraging everyone who I work with and who I engage with, use AI every day. Because if you don't use AI every day, you're actually not necessarily going to be able to understand it in different contexts, whether it's a personal context or whether it's a work context. And I don't know, but I can't imagine a boardroom conversation that says, yeah, we had to let Caroline go because she knew too much about AI. So I don't think they're the conversations that actually are going to happen, but also build skills that can't be replicated by technology. And those are the soft skills around, interaction, emotional intelligence, relationship building, mentoring, how you connect the dots across different departments. It's all of the human skills that actually make us human.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both of you. The feedback from the audience, really enjoying the session. Could listen to you for hours, but we've only got 1 hour today. So we'll just try and, as rapid fire as we can, move through some questions from the audience. So the first one that I've got here is around what advice you have if fear is holding you back from making a change. So Leona, I might go to you first to talk to that, and then Caroline, if you've got anything you'd like to add.
Well, fear is a funny thing. And one of the things that I ask people who I mentor and people who I've coached over my career is, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And I asked myself that question when I had to make a big career transition, leaving a very big role and actually not having anything to go to, but it was a values misalignment. And I was very fearful because I was the primary breadwinner. My husband was back at uni, had a 2-year-old son, and I thought, well, what if I don't get another job, actually? And so I asked myself, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And it was very clear to me what I would do. I would leave and I would use my network to actually discuss what might be next. I did those things, got a better job. The rest is history. So I think removing fear from the equation, whilst might be difficult, I really encourage you to do that, because all courage is fear walking.
Thank you.
Nicole, the one bit I would add there is we often think about emotions as problems to solve. I actually think that if you can, again, mindset, reframe and say, what is that fear telling me and what insights can I garner from that matters? And in fact, you can do that with anger, you can do that with resentment, you can do that with whatever emotional joy. And again, taking the time to not just get stuck in the fear itself, but actually use it as a point of insight, and then to align your actions to those insights. And quite frankly, learn to sit with it a bit. Because all of the really good stuff that I find happens in your career journey will require a certain level of discomfort, and not seeing that as a sign that something's wrong, actually seeing that as learning is happening. You're moving forward in a new direction and things are opening up.
Thank you. Another popular question in the chat is, for professionals who already have experience working in the public sector, what are the best ways to transition into freelancing, and how can they effectively leverage their existing skills and network to build a successful freelance career? So, Leanna, would you like to tackle that one first as well?
Yeah, sure. And I think these things actually come with a bit of trial and error. And what you can do while you're still in your full-time career is actually do some stuff on the side, create some side hustles around the things that you're interested in freelancing on. But to do that, you have to work out, you know, what is it that's really important to me? What is it that I value? And what do I feel passionate about? What's my purpose? And what do I want to engage in? And what do I want to make a difference to? So getting clear about those areas that you want to work in. So for me, one of my things that I did on the side in my corporate career was I did a lot on climate resilience. Now, I managed to incorporate that into my corporate career, but also did some work on the side with some of the UN committees. So get really clear about opportunity. So just try something and see whether it's got some legs for you. But if it is aligned to purpose and values, actually you'll find a way. And find others who can help you find a way. Speak to other people who have done it, and just engage in the conversation. And it's funny how once you start putting something out there, things happen.
Caroline?
I'm going to suggest we might jump to the next one, but because I was going to touch on networks, but I think Leona's already covered that, which is great.
Yep, awesome. Thank you. And another tip, just from a previous webinar we had with, I think it was with Sarah Park, but she spoke around volunteering, that you could volunteer at your local Scouts group or surf club. If you're interested in finance, you know, you could volunteer and, you know, work your way up to be the treasurer or thing. So you're building skills that then can help you, even though it's not a paid opportunity, just as another option. Another popular question here is around this. I'll go to you, Caroline, first for this one. Is, would there be a difference in pivoting a career via a new bachelor degree or via a master, so something non-related, so zero experience, I guess? So this is from a woman in her 40s. So just looking at, I think perhaps, if you wanted to go into a new career, would you start at the bottom at a bachelor level, or would you try and pivot across into a master's level and build on and use your current experience?
So I think so there's a practical element to that, and there's also then the other tangent. So practically, a lot of Australian universities, including Griffith, and I think we're doing an absolutely fabulous job of this, is they are creating more flexibility of recognition of prior learning. So I think if you can do a master's and it's going to give you what you need, that's absolutely something to think about, because it will give you it's a higher level degree. It will give you a whole range of other things that you may or may not get with a bachelor. So I think the point around, as you're pivoting, it goes back to where I started actually, which is around the career stories. That sometimes pivoting, yes, there are new things that you need to learn if you want to pivot a career, but it's also about being really intentional about what you're bringing with you and the skills that you already have. And so it's not just about getting the degree, but really thinking about what are the puzzle pieces you're going to bring together. The other bit would be how you're building your networks around your new career paths, and looking for sponsors or champions. And sponsors and champions, to me, are quite different than mentors. Mentors are people that you can seek advice from, who might have had previous experience. A sponsor is somebody who's going to advocate for you. And I think when you're pivoting and you're going through, and it takes a lot of courage, and I think I've done that a few times myself, finding people who are going to back you, who believe in you, who are going to put you forward, I think that's also a really important part. So it's about being strategic about your degree, but I think it's also about building the support ecosystem around you, and also taking the time for yourself to say, how does what I've already done give me a real edge in this new career? So for example, I'm a Dean of Career Readiness and Employability. My background is actually in international education and student success. the reason I have an edge as a Dean of Employability is because I'm bringing all of those different lenses to the employability conversation, and I know the context of employability as well. So my strength is actually the combination of all of my career paths, not one path in and of itself. I don't know if that's helpful, but
that's great. Thank you. Probably just got time for one more question. So this one, and I thought from me, I've felt from both of you, a big thing coming through is how in control of your own destiny we all are, and how important it is to remind yourself of that, and to be brave. And move forward with purpose. But this question's around what's your advice for working in organisations where its values align with you, but some individual employees don't? So how, if you have any advice for I guess you can't always control all the people that come into your life. So if you have advice around working through that at an individual level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all come across people who are different to ourselves, and we find difficulty in working with them. What I try and do is I try and make that a opportunity for me, or something that I'm wanting to solve. So why am I having difficulty working with this person, and make it my problem to solve, rather than actually, I can't work with this person because of X, Y, and Z. Well, actually, how might I work differently to enable that to be different? And so I've had a situation where there was someone on a board that I just didn't gel with. So I just spent some time actually really understanding them. So getting to know them better, getting to understand what drove them. Then I realised that our differences actually seem to dissolve away. And so I spent time relationship building and appreciating that difference actually creates value. So that's how I've personally dealt with the situation.
Thank you. Carolyn, do you have anything to add?
No, I really love that, Leona, and I think it's about also how do you create the conditions for different values to actually be present, and that's everything from how you structure meetings to, if you have to lead a project, how you're scaffolding the work. So seeing values not just as something that individuals hold, but also thinking about values through the lens of the decisions you make around your operations, the decisions you make around, hiring. Every action also speaks values. So I think it's being really intentional about that. And if I can be frank, the other bit I'd add in is the importance of holding on to your authenticity, because I think sometimes when we are faced with value misalignment, sometimes then we aren't always at our best. And so I think, when I've been in organizations where the value alignment, I actually remember at one point, before I would walk into a workplace, I would say, who am I? What matters to me? I care about people. I want to create spaces where people feel safe. And so being really intentional about my values as well. So that's my closing thought there.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.